In this lecture, we're going to see that it is possible to customize how our program ends if there is an unhandled exception. Suppose we have a piece of code like this and we are throwing an exception and it is not handled anywhere in this program here. As we have seen, this is going to cause for our program to crash, and we don't really want this, but we can control how our program behaves if there is a situation like this with an unhandled exception. And to see that, first we need to understand how C++ is wired by default. So if there is an exception that is not handled anywhere in the program, the operating system is going to call the terminate function, which is leaving in this header here called exception. In this terminate function, we are going to call the abort function, which is actually going to terminate our program. So what is possible is to set up our own termination function and bypass the default that is wired in C++. And this is what we're going to look at in this lecture. So to do that, you just call the std set terminate function, and you do that like we see here. And what you pass is the name of the function that is going to be called to replace the standard terminate function. Once you do this, you will have to set up this function somewhere. So it is living here as an example. And inside, you're going to do whatever you need to do when an exception happens and that exception is not handled anywhere in your program. One thing you should make sure you do is that after you do your thing, you need to call the std abort function to actually terminate the program. And this is going to be called when an unhandled exception happens. So what I am doing here in this function is setting up a piece of code to wait for the program to finish. This is a piece of code that is going to make our program wait for 10 seconds. This is the setup we can do here. I won't really go into the details of explaining chrono. Maybe we will do that later in the course, but we're not going to worry about that here. Just know that this piece of code is going to make our program wait for 10 more seconds before it dies. This is what we do here. This is a simple function we did, but we can also set this up in the form of a lambda function, and we can do something like this and pass a lambda function directly, and this is also going to work. Okay, so once we have this set up and we throw an exception that is not handled anywhere, the C++ system is going to call our terminate function. It is going to do whatever we want to do before we call the abort function to actually kill our program. And this is how you can set these things up. One thing you should know is that if you don't call abort in your std terminate function, the program is going to be killed anyway. So it is really good practice to make sure you call the abort method in your custom terminate function. Now that you know this, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is Program Custom Termination. We are going to grab our template files as usual, and we're going to put them in place. And let's open this up in Visual Studio Code by dragging and dropping here. We will have our main CPP file, and we are going to clean it up a little bit. And the first thing I really want to do here is to throw an exception and not handle it and show you what happens. We already know this, but it doesn't hurt to really see this again. So we're going to throw an exception, and let's throw a 1. I think this is what we did in the slides. And if we build and run this program, let's use GCC. The build is going to be good, but if we try to run this, let's make sure we do that. We are going to see that we are calling the terminate function after throwing an instance of int, and this is going to kill our program, so our program is basically going to crash. But we don't want to call the standard std terminate function. We want to put in our own termination function that is going to be called and kill our program. We are going to set this function up in front of the main function. We are going to call it our terminate function. We are going to do whatever it is we want to do. And in this case, we just want to make it wait 10 more seconds before our program is actually killed. Remember to call the std abort function because this is what is actually going to kill your program. But if the operating system sees that you are not calling the std abort function, it is going to see this as a rogue program and it is going to kill it anyway. So make sure you put this in to let the operating system know that you want your program to be killed as a result of this unhandled exception here. Once we have our custom terminate function in, what we need to do is to call the std set terminate function. To do that, we will need to include the exception header. Let's do that. And we are going to go down and say std set terminate. I think this is the name. And we are going to pass in the address of our terminate function here. We can do something like this. So it is possible to take the address of a function and pass that to another function. We don't really have enough tools to dive into the details of this, but we will as we progress in the course. So don't worry about this. This is just a way to tell C++ to use this terminate function when an unhandled exception happens. Now, another thing we don't really know enough details about is this line of code we have on line 7. This is just a thing that is going to make this program wait 10 more seconds. So you are just going to take this as a fact, and maybe we will have a chance to cover chrono and threading, and we will go into the details of this. But for now, we just want to make this program wait a little while before it is killed. So let's put in a simple comment. And for this to work, we need to include the chrono header. Let's do that. And we also needed the thread header. Let's put this in. And this is going to make this line here work. Now, watch what happens if we try to throw this exception. Now, the C++ system is going to fall into this function, and we are going to do whatever it is we want to do in here. Let's make sure we run this. We're going to pass this through our favorite compiler, GCC. You can use any compiler you want. It is going to just work. And we are going to run our program. Now you see that our custom terminate function is called. And we will wait for this to finish in 10 seconds. Let's wait a little while. You're going to see that it is going to die. 1, 2, and it is dead. You see that this is the setup we just did here. This is going to call our custom terminate function. Another thing I want you to see before we wrap up this lecture is that it is possible to use a lambda function as your custom terminate function. So what we do is say std set terminate. We're going to do the same thing, and we are going to put a lambda function in place. We're going to put our capture list, and we are going to put in our parameter list, and then we're going to put a body in. And in this body, we are going to put the body we have in this function here. So we can just copy this, put this in place in our lambda function, and let's align this a little bit, move this a little bit to the right. And we need a closing semicolon at the end of our statement here. And this is going to do exactly the same thing we were doing with this guy. It is just a different setup we can do. We can also use a lambda function here. I just want you to know this. Now we can build with GCC. The build is going to be good. And if we run our program, we're going to see that it is going to do exactly the same thing. It is going to wait 10 more seconds before we kill our program here if we have an unhandled exception. The last thing I want you to see is that if you don't call abort explicitly like we do here, the operating system is going to still kill your application, and this is really not good design. So you should really remember to put this call in, because this is how the operating system is going to know that you want this program killed here. But if we don't put this line in here, our program is going to still be killed. I want you to know this, so we're going to pass this through GCC, and the build is going to be good. As you see down here, we can clear and run rooster. We are going to wait 10 seconds, and we are not calling abort to really kill our program, but you're going to see that it is going to be killed anyway because we have an unhandled exception. You should really know this. You see it is dead. Even if we didn't call the abort function explicitly, it is the operating system being smart, but your program is really a rogue program. It's not really behaving in a way that the operating system expects it to behave. It is still advised to put in the abort call here. I just want you to know this. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you found it interesting. The main message was that it is possible to customize how our program ends if we have an unhandled exception, it is possible to pass a regular function like this. Or you can even use a lambda function like we just did on line 17 here. Either is going to work just fine. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about the ellipsis catch-all block. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.